Hello, and welcome to the webinar, A Practical Guide to the EI-ISAC. Today's presentation is part of a series of webinars brought to you by the Certificate in Election Administration program at the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School of Public Affairs. My name is Lee Chittenden. I am the Administrative Director of the Certificate Program, and I want to thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, I have a couple housekeeping items to go over. First, we are recording the webinar and we'll be sending out a link to the recording once we are finished. During the presentation, we will have two Q&A sessions where you will be able to submit questions to the panelists. In order to ask a question, click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the webinar screen, highlighted here by the red circle. This will open a Q&A dialog box where you can type and submit your question. We will be monitoring questions and we'll get through as many as we can. Due to the volume of attendees on today's webinar, we will not be using the chat feature. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Moderating the webinar is Judd Choate. Judd is the Director of Elections for the Colorado Department of State. He was the President of the National Association of State Election Directors in 2017. He has a JD from the University of Colorado Law School and a PhD in political science from Purdue University. Judd is also a faculty and steering committee member for the Certificate in Election Administration program here at the Humphrey School. Joining us from the Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or the EI-ISAC, we have Ben Spear and Kateri Gill. Ben is the director of the EI-ISAC, where he serves as a cybersecurity resource for state and local election officials. Ben coordinated the nationwide deployment of an elections-focused cyber defense suite in advance of the 2018 midterm elections. Prior to this, Ben served in various roles on the MS-ISAC cyber intelligence team, deploying innovative new ways to identify and present current cyber threats trends to SLTT constituents and providing expertise on critical infrastructure security. With his past experience developing law enforcement training for New York State and educational background in history, political science, and public administration, Ben has a unique perspective of the who, how, and why of malicious cyber activity. Kateri is a program manager for the EI-ISAC. She began her career at the Center for Internet Security by working with information security representatives from across our nation's state, local, territorial, and tribal governments. She particularly focused on spreading awareness of the multi-state ISAC's cybersecurity resources and services, and also co-chaired the Business Resiliency Workgroup. In 2017, Kateri shifted her focus and became an integral player in the initial pilot and launch of the EI-ISAC. She now ensures that election organizations have access to the resources they need to improve their comprehensive cybersecurity posture. Welcome to our panelists. And now I will turn it over to Judd, who will provide some context for how and why the EI-ISAC was established before we jump into the main presentation from Ben and Kateri. Judd?
The Elections Administration Certificate Program, and for making these webinars possible. You may have noticed a bit of a trend recently. We have informally created this election security series. The first webinar was on physical and cybersecurity. That was with Matt Masterson back in May. Today we've got Ben Spear and Kateri Gill from the EI-ISAC. They're going to explain to us how to use the wealth of information from the ISAC. And I'm excited to announce that in late September, we will partner again with the Department of Homeland Security to discuss all their programs and offerings that they provide at no cost to elections administrators. This will cover everything from cyber hygiene to the full-scale risk and vulnerability assessments. That's going to come late in September. We haven't quite figured out the nuances yet, but if you stay tuned, be on the lookout, we'll have more information. All right, now to today's webinar. So if you're like me, you don't have a computer science degree, and you didn't just leave a mid-six-figure IT job to become an elections professional. Instead, you've probably been learning IT along the way. That's certainly what I've been doing, and I think what we've all been doing since the 2016 election, especially with the security focus that created. Because this isn't what we all signed up for, but we believe in free and fair elections, we've had to sort of switch and become cybersecurity experts. And that's been a hard switch, and learning how to use and consume that information is really part of the game. As you know, the elections profession has been through a couple of these. Back in 2000, with the 2000 presidential election, we all had to become lawyers. Then there was HAVA, and we all had to become IT professionals. And now, as a consequence of this election, we all had to become cybersecurity specialists. The good news is we've proven in the past that elections administration can shift as the landscape shifts. So we're up to this. This webinar is an effort to help you understand and use cybersecurity information to help you secure your elections. And today's webinar is from the very people who provide that information. So in effect, it's like learning how to play rhythm guitar from Keith Richards, even with the Open G tuning. I probably lost some of you there, but stick with me. So where did the EI-ISAC come from, and why are we talking about it? Well, in January of 2017, Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson declared elections as critical infrastructure. And then by the fall of that year, a government coordinating council had been created with 28 local, state, and federal government elections officials, plus a DHS representative. And that GCC then, its first major decision was to form an EI-ISAC, which is an Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, EI-ISAC. And they used the multi-state ISAC, which was already existing and was in use among the 50 states, with the help of the Center for Internet Security, which is where the MS-ISAC is, to create an EI-ISAC. And that formally happened in March of 2018. Since then, that ISAC has been providing security information to the elections community, and it's been a really growing ISAC. I think, in fact, my understanding is it's the fastest growing ISAC ever, with almost 2,000 people already, 2,000 entities already getting that information. So let's learn a lot about the ISAC and the information it provides, and then how you can use that information. So that's what we're going to do today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ben Spear, who is the EI-ISAC director, and then the Kateri Gill, the program manager at EI-ISAC. So take it away, guys.
Thanks, Judd, and thanks everyone for joining us. We're glad to have you here with us to sort of go through a practical guide to the EI-ISAC and sort of walk through not just what we provide, but how you can use it. And so, as always, I think it's important to start with being aware of how one can become an EI-ISAC member. I know that many of you might already be EI-ISAC members. It is a free and voluntary membership. While we are an information sharing center, you are not required to share information with us. We are required to share information with you, but you can share as freely as you please. We understand that folks have their concerns. If they share this, it might become available, and we have protections that we put in place to protect your information. But we certainly respect your choice whether or not to share information or not. But certainly the more information you share, the more information we can provide back out into the products that we're going to talk to you about a little bit today and help. And so registration is easy. You can go to the link here in the blue box, learn.cisecurity.org/EI-ISAC registration, or you can Google for the Elections ISAC homepage, and there's a big green box there on our homepage that says Join EI-ISAC, and that will take you to the same place. So as Judd mentioned, we now have actually just over 2,000 members. We just crossed that threshold in the last week or two. We have all 50 states that are participating in the EI-ISAC at the state level, Secretary of State, boards of election, et cetera. And we now have 1,920 local election offices in 49 states, 5 of the 6 territories. All of the major election official associations, such as NAS, NASED, IGO, Election Center, as well, we have what we call supporting members. We allow the election vendor community to participate to receive our cybersecurity information so that they're getting the same threat information that you are and are able to respond to the threats that affect the community as a whole. I'm proud to say that we did an analysis recently, and in this just short year and a half now, with our local membership, we account for 84% of the U.S. population, which is a great accomplishment and a testament to the work of folks like Judd and a number of the other officials who helped set up the GCC and start this conversation in the community. And with that also, we have 15 states that have 100% local membership. And so this is a great chart. 15 states with over 100%, with 100% local membership, not over, because that'd be, well, pretty tough. But we do have 27 states that have 27 states with at least 50% membership, which is also a great accomplishment, testament to the work that folks have done. So.
If I can chime in, sorry
Sure.
to interrupt, but I do love to interrupt a good webcast. This is Kateri. I did actually want to throw it out there that even though we did these slides today, they're actually already out of date. We have a 16th state that just joined the 100% ranking.
Oh, that's right.
Tennessee's actually at 100% as well. So definitely exciting times, huge growth, and great representation.
Great point, Kateri. So what we'd like to do is we'd sort of like to walk you through some of the things that we have and sort of how you can make use of them. So I'm going to turn it over to Kateri to sort of start this, because she's the brains behind everything. And we'll hope this is some valuable information for you guys.
All right, I hope everybody understands that Ben was completely joking when he said that I'm the brains behind everything, but one thing I did recently do was write up a little blog post for the EI-ISAC that says, I'm a member, now what? Because that's always the challenge. Many of you on this webcast are probably already members and maybe don't know exactly how to navigate everything that you're receiving from us, or don't even know where to start, because there are a lot of resources and services out there, but you need to pick a place to start so that you can get yourself accustomed to it and take the most advantage possible out of your membership. For those of you who are not yet members, if you haven't yet clicked on that registration link and gone and joined, this is actually a great intro for you so that when you do get onboarded, you can go ahead and immediately jump right in and know what the first few steps are. So the first step is get information into the right hands. So the idea here is that we're sending you a lot of information, but we want to make sure that we're getting it to the right people as efficiently as possible. So if you're an election official, we had a comment about how you probably didn't get an IT degree and you probably didn't leave a several $100,000 a year position to become an election official. If you're an election official, you probably don't want to be navigating the waters of all of the technical information that we have available. So we do encourage you to add additional contacts to your account. If you have an IT director or an information security officer, for those of you who are from smaller entities, you may have a contractor who you work with. We do very much encourage you to add those individuals to your account, and you can just reach out to us at elections@cisecurity.org, and you can send the technical information to them so it's not clogging up your inbox. We do have multiple levels of access, so say you have people who are just interested in cybersecurity in your organization, want to receive some of the information, but you don't necessarily want them to receive notifications on alerts that are specific to your organization. So say we identify your user credentials or somebody from your organization's user credentials in a database dump, you might not want everybody in your organization to receive that type of information. So we have a lot of different ways that we can split it out. We can definitely work with you to make sure that the information you're receiving and the people who you work with are receiving are appropriate for you and them. So just as long as we're talking about content maintenance, you can always reach out to us to adjust what you're receiving. But I know that if you've been a member for quite some time of the EI-ISAC, sorry, we're having a little bit of trouble changing slides on in the proper order, or only one at a time, I should say. So for those of you who have been members for quite some time, you may actually still be receiving technical products, because when we first set up the EI-ISAC, we set it up on the backbone of the MS-ISAC, which really concentrated on those technical materials. Leah, I don't know if you have control over the slides, but can you go back one slide? Oh, there we go. Okay, cool. Thank you. So for those of you who are still receiving technical notifications, or those of you who are having trouble navigating the waters of what's actually coming into your inbox from us, one of the easiest ways to sort out the technical versus the non-technical is that our technical products generally come from the MS-ISAC advisory inbox, whereas the ones that are more election-specific will come from EI-ISAC advisory or elections@ci-security.org. So those are a couple ways to navigate the letters, and also see whether or not you're receiving a lot of technical products, because if you are receiving things like the top attacking IPs and domains, the monthly situational report, things like that, and it's just too much for you, you can always reach out to us and say, hey, can you dial it back a little bit for me? Because again, when we set it up initially, we just didn't have the backbone all there to create those non-technical products and non-technical distribution lists. So we apologize, but we have it all figured out now. So don't hesitate to reach out and adjust. Or if you're not receiving the more technical products and you're interested in receiving them, we can also make the switch back in that direction as well. So sorry.
It's always important to take a look and focus in on what are those key offerings that we have available. And I think that's something Kateri really was addressing with the contact maintenance, but also even within the EI-ISAC product line, there are a few that we think are very key and very important for you to be able to connect with and to take a more deep dive on and pay attention to as they come in. And probably one of the most important are election-specific cyber alerts. Now, a cyber alert is a product that is going to come out if something's happening, if we are seeing something. And this is where we see activity across multiple states, or maybe multiple jurisdictions within a single state, or similar activity as a whole that's affecting the elections community. It's a short email alert that is targeted at both election administrators and their technical staff. Now, when we created these for the MS-ISAC originally, they were very highly technical documented. We worked with Judd and the folks in the pilot to establish one that is more directed towards the election official as well. And so we give a great narrative to break down and explain what it is that is the trend or incident that we're seeing affecting the election community. We provide user recommendations for what you as an election official can do. And then we provide that full chock full of technical detail at the bottom. And so this is just a very important, if you receive a cyber alert, that is our highest level of alert that we send out if something is happening. And so we want to make sure that that's something you're paying attention to and reading. And if you receive a cyber alert, as I said, it means something's happening in terms of targeting or threat trends in the election community right now. So you're going to want to work with your IT staff, with the appropriate officials to take this information and ensure that you are taking every step to protect your systems against this ongoing threat in the community. Now, one of the most important things to understand as an election official are the perception issues. I mean, just this last day, many folks might have seen the reporting on the touchscreen voting machines in Mississippi that were supposedly changing votes. And as we know, there's a lot of screen calibration things that go into the touch screens. Now, understanding that as an election official and understanding that as a voter or as a resident or as a cybersecurity official are very different things. And so what we understand or what you understand or what the voter understands are all from a different context, and we want to approach those in various ways. And so we created a product to address that. You know, one example, another besides the voting machines recently, is that in 2016 and even in 2018, we saw a lot of postings about voter records for sale on the internet or voter records that were compromised. In 2016, a lot of them were compromises of third-party campaign organizations or political marketing firms. In 2018, we had an actor claiming they had actual back-end access to all 50 voter registration databases, and they were trying to sell them for a particular amount of money. But if you look at the details and you have an understanding of the back end like an election official, They say, oh, we're getting weekly updates. We have a direct connection into their system. And that's really how us as election officials, as election administrators, share our voter information with campaigns, with legitimate users through FOIL or through for sale processes. And so it's likely that these actors were actually doing something a little different. And so that's why we created the weekly news alert, to sort of provide analysis of that sort of reporting that is out there in the world that may suggest that, oh, a particular election system was hacked, or that a particular process isn't working, et cetera, is to provide that context for you and a summary of what's important to focus on. And so we take regular election security stories. We take information on legislative action from the Secure Election Act, from Congress, things like that. We look at best practices, such as the implementation of multi-factor. A number of states have done that recently. A number of locals have done assessments of themselves. And so we focus on the work that election officials are doing and providing context on how you can approach that yourself, or if there's something negative, what is actually being reported and how you address the threat that might be posited by that reporting, such as a claimed hack or something like that. And so it's a really important, quick, easy way to get an understanding of the cybersecurity landscape from a news perspective.
So not only do we have the weekly news alert and also, of course, those advisories. Again, if there's one thing and one thing only you hone in on, we definitely suggest is the advisories. But I think we all have those people in our organizations who are very frustrating and make those mistakes. So we like to make sure people are aware of cybersecurity issues. This image on the screen is from a local grocery store here in upstate New York where we're based, and that little gray box is a router for the wireless network for the grocery store, and that white strip on that gray box is the administrator password. So a little bit of awareness could have been useful there. Then, of course, we have the lovely Prince of England on his first day at the Royal Air Force, and the news cameras came around, took a bunch of pictures to share them out, all bragging about the big contribution that the Prince is making and everything. But if we zoom in on those pictures, on the right there, you see MilSlip login details with the username and password, and when these pictures were initially distributed, those were not blacked out. So just those little awareness things, not only getting you to understand what to be aware of on a day-to-day basis, but also understanding cybersecurity issues, threats, trends, things like that, so that you can explain them to the general public, so that you have a better understanding of what's going on. We are now switching these over to monthly, so on Fridays in the middle of the month moving forward, we'll be releasing these Cybersecurity Spotlights, which focus in on key terms and things that we feel that you as election officials should really be able to understand what it is, but not just that, why does it matter to you and your organization? And then finally, of course, what can you do about it? So a great example is DDoS attacks. A DDoS attack is essentially if everyone on this call, we unmuted everybody at the same time and you all asked questions at the same time to us, we would probably run and hide in the corner because we couldn't understand any of you. You can basically do the same thing to a network, where if you send way too much traffic at it, you can actually make it so that it's unresponsive. So that's a DDoS attack. Now, this can happen intentionally, but it can also happen unintentionally. And a lot of times, those unintentional DDoS attacks are things that affect election night reporting websites, with everybody refreshing the page looking for the results of the election. So it's important to understand that not only are these the only reason why DDoS attacks can occur is not because of malicious behavior. So it's important to be able to understand what's happening in your own organization, understand what types of protections you can put in place, and then also it helps you with your messaging to the general public.
So another in the next step is that we strongly recommend folks listen in to our quarterly call and read our quarterly threat report. This is something where we haven't mentioned yet, but we have network monitors on the election networks in all 50 states at the state level, as well as a number of locals as well that have decided to use our Albert network monitoring, which you might have heard about. It's this report where we compile all the information from all the incidents that our members report to us that we've responded to create an assessment and analysis of what the cyber threats look like in the election sector specifically in a particular quarter. Now, I can say that the vast majority of activity that we see that affects election officials is no different than what we see targeting state and local governments on a regular day-to-day basis. It is fairly similar activity. But this is a great place with the call to get that threat briefing, to receive best practices from our members. We'll have members come on and talk about what they've done to implement a particular cybersecurity tool in their environment. We'll have our partners from DHS, EAC, NAS, NASED talking about what work they're doing for elections, as well as some third-party partners come in to talk about various work that they've done in elections. And so it's a great place to get an understanding of what we've been doing in the ISAC. It's really a follow-up to this type of call. The quarterly call is a status update that also helps you track, okay, what are we working on these days, and where should I, as an election official, be focusing my attention on what it is that the EI-ISAC is providing.
Perfect. So now we've got some contact information, making sure the right people are receiving the right information, a couple of things in your inbox to pay attention to, a call to join on a quarterly basis. Lastly, or the last major service type piece that we want to make sure you're aware of, and is one of those first 5 steps, is to enroll in our IP and domain monitoring service. And I apologize that the slide is a little bit skewed, but I think you can get all of the basic information from it, or the important information. This is one of the main things I recommend to both MS and EI-ISAC members. We do it for both, and it's a set it and forget it type of thing. So if you provide us with your public-facing IP addresses and domain space, so your IP addresses are unique to your environment. If you have an IT staff, it's probably easiest to work with them to send them over to us. But your domains are very easy, where that's the @whatever.gov portion of your email address, or your website, things like that. So if you send that information over, we can basically act as a second set of eyes for you. It's a totally non-invasive service, so I hate the word monitoring for these services, but I don't really have something better to use. So basically, we're just keeping an eye out. We do open source monitoring to see if there's any signs of compromise related to your organization. So a great example, I kind of alluded to it before, is if your credentials, so your usernames and passwords, are found in a database dump. So malicious actors tend to steal a whole bunch of usernames and passwords from a site, and then they like to brag about it. So they'll post it out on the public web, or sometimes on different sites that the general public wouldn't often go to. But we keep an eye on those types of things to see if any of the domains matching the ones that our users provided us have any credentials associated with them posted. So what we would do is, if we saw something, we would notify you about it, so then you would know that that user should be changing their passwords, which, you know, we should be doing anyways, but a lot of times these are coming from public sites that have been compromised, so things like LinkedIn, Facebook, different social media type sites, but we know that users love to reuse their passwords across both personal and work accounts, so we do like to make sure that we notify you of those. A couple other things we do associated with the public-facing IP and domain ranges that you give us are our port profiler and our web profiler, which are 2 pieces of our vulnerability management program. Basically, what we're doing with those is we're keeping an eye out to A, make sure any services that are running on your public website are up to date and you don't have major vulnerabilities associated with them. And B, with the port profiler, we're making sure that ports that we see generally associated with things that shouldn't be connected to the internet aren't open and openly accessible by us. So those notifications come out monthly for the web profiler, those out-of-date services, and then quarterly for the port profiler. A lot of times these are things that you might be working with your IT staff for, but especially with the web profiler and out-of-date services, if you've got a company that you use to manage your website, that's something that we highly suggest you would forward over to whoever keeps your website up to date and let them know that they're running out of date services. So it's one of those things that we see people kind of ignoring or maybe not aware of. So we like to make sure we're helping you to keep your website up to date, even if you're not the one physically updating it.
And the last step that we think is clearly the most important in many ways is that you reach out to us. We run a 24/7 security operations center here in upstate New York. There is a human on the line at all times of the day and night, even on Christmas Eve. And sometimes we've had to come back on Christmas Eve because of something affecting a state or local government. So if you have an incident, there's an 800 number. We'll show it 1,000 times on this call, 866-787-4722, or you can email soc@cisecurity.org. They're able to provide support, any sort of questions you might have about a cybersecurity issue, any reporting you might have that you want to make us aware of. It's a great place to contact. And if it's not something that's an emergency, you can always also contact us in the elections inbox at elections@cisecurity.org. So with that, I think we're at a quick Q&A break. I'll turn it over to Judd quick. I think that's a good overview of the 5 things you can do initially with your EI-ISAC membership to sort of parse it out. So we'll take a break there to see if there's any questions about that.
Janelle McFadden has asked, are the topics in these mailers, so when you get the emails that have the cyber alerts or the collected news from the week or month, are the topics mentioned, and do those various emails sort of identify what they're going to focus on so that you can drill down easily? And you guys should probably unmute yourselves.
Yes.
Sure. So, I mean, the subject lines of each of those are unique. So our subject lines for Cybersecurity Spotlight will say Cybersecurity Spotlight, and then they'll actually say the topic that it focuses on. For the weekly news alert, it comes out Wednesday afternoons, and it does say EI-ISAC, it says message from the EI-ISAC weekly news alert. That won't necessarily say in the subject line the topics of that weekly news alert because it would be a very long subject line, but each of a brief synopsis in bold is over each paragraph or each different topic that we cover within that.
Yeah, and I'll add that the spotlights we do specifically call out the topic, but we're also looking at, for specific types of alerts, we're looking at potentially prioritizing, creating sort of a prioritization system of a high, medium, low for some of the emails. That's not something that we're ready to do just yet, but we're exploring it as a possibility to make it even easier for folks to identify what they should be reading more imminently.
And we don't have any other questions, but I have a quick question. So recently, ransomware has become a really big problem in local governments. What's happening down in Texas, and we've seen the Atlanta situation. We had here in Colorado, we had a situation not too recently. So ransomware is sort of a broad term. It doesn't speak to a particular cyber vulnerability, but from your perspective, how could you speak to that issue in your write-ups that come from EI-ISAC that could really help a local administrator?
Yeah, so I think that's a great point. It's something that we are looking at, as I'm sure you've seen in the media, that ransomware has become a big issue, and ourselves and DHS are looking at ways to address that particular issue in the election community. So I think as we think about elections in that perspective, and I think Kateri's got a good slide coming up to address one particular piece of that issue, on how you talk about it to election officials, it's providing related context, I think, to understand that issue. Training is very important, obviously, in the case of ransomware. So many of them come through phishing emails or through various types like that. And I think that the thing that you want to watch for is that so many of these systems, the way that the ransomware spreads is through systems that are all connected to each other. And I think a benefit that we have in the elections community, but that's still something we need to watch for, is that election officials have several segmented networks where an EMS might be in one place and a business system might be in another place, because that's the biggest threat in terms of doing work on the same system as you do your elections work, is where I think the biggest risk comes there when it comes to ransomware.
Definitely, and of course, we always like to put things in more of like a risk context. We don't like to tell people pay the ransom or don't pay the ransom, but we do like to remind people of the considerations on each end. You know, what might be potential impacts of actually paying the ransom, whereas what might be the impacts of not paying the ransom. So, you know, things like the cost-benefit of analysis of if you were to pay the ransom, you know, you may get your systems unlocked more quickly, especially if you don't have proper backups, but if you may also become a future target, or you may pay the ransom and the decryption key may not work. So different things to take into consideration. We are considering putting out some products on that in particular because it is such a hot topic. But of course, if people ever have any questions, or I really hope not experiencing an incident, but of course, if you are experiencing an incident, we're always happy to help out.
Hey, there are more questions in the question box, but I know you've got more slides. So why don't you go ahead with the second half of your presentation, and I'll answer a couple of these with typed answers, and then we'll come back to some other questions when we get to the end.
Sounds great, Judd. So I think the thing we wanted to move forward with here is, even though those are those 5 things we want you to focus on, there are a few other parts of the EI-ISAC that we want folks to be aware of that do provide additional value and that can help you as you try to engage your membership. And what we always like to talk about when we look at the Elections ISAC is that we do provide an elections-focused cyber defense suite. We have that 24/7, 365 operations center where we run the network monitoring out of that I mentioned. We have an incident response team that I'll talk about in a second. We have a election-specific threat intelligence, which we just walked through a lot of those products that we offer there. We do the threat and vulnerability monitoring that Kateri mentioned. And we're also promoting a lot of security best practices that our parent company, CIS, has had a great role in working with us and DHS and the elections community and the EAC and the vendors to develop what are the best ways to approach certain cybersecurity issues in the elections community. Now, I mentioned we have an incident response team. We call them the Computer Emergency Response Team, or CERT. And one of the great things that we're able to offer through the funding that is provided to us from DHS is that if something happens to a network that is under your control or a system on your network, our team can help respond to that incident. We can actually do the forensics, try to identify what it is that happened, how it happened, let you know anything that the malware might have done on your network, if there's sufficient logs, of course. But this is a great tool to be able to use, especially in those small jurisdictions that don't necessarily have the ability to leverage an IT security analysis at that level. This is no cost, and all you do is send us a copy of your hard drive, and we're able to provide you a full analysis of what it was that happened.
So we know that a lot of times these incidents can occur from suspicious emails or malicious emails, but suspicious emails aren't just an issue from the standpoint of maybe leading into a major incident. A lot of times it's the question of, what do I do? Do I open this or not? Because you don't want to miss an email that's important from a business standpoint, or especially with elections offices, there are a lot of emails that you legally can't not open. But when you're receiving these emails that you weren't expecting that have attachments or links, things like that, you're just not sure whether or not to open them. And it would be great if you knew whether or not they were malicious before you open the attachments. So one service that we do provide is analysis of suspicious emails. So if you forward as an attachment, and there is a little diagram on the screen for you there if you don't know how to forward as an attachment. If you forward as an attachment any suspicious emails you receive, our CERT team can actually analyze them for you and let you know whether or not they see anything malicious related to them. So that's huge. So you don't have to sit there and debate, do I open this or do I not? Because phishing has definitely led to some serious problems in the past. If anyone doesn't believe me, go ahead and look up Ukraine's critical infrastructure incident in 2015, when the entire power grid was essentially shut down thanks to somebody clicking on something in a phishing email. So keep that in mind. You can always forward over as attachments any suspicious emails to us. And if you don't mind actually going back, that email address, submission@malware.cisecurity.org, is the quickest way to get that analyzed. I do want to make mention, as long as I'm throwing out an alternate email address to you, that if nothing else, no soc@cisecurity.org. If you email any of us, we will get it into the right hands. SOC is our 24/7/365 inbox, so you'll definitely get it into the right hands pretty efficiently. But if you don't remember a particular email address or don't remember who you were supposed to email for a particular type of thing, please don't make that a reason not to email someone. We will work with you to get it into the right hands.
Yeah, and I'll stress how important it is to send something as an attachment. There's a lot of data in the actual email that is sent to you, and so we need to have that data. If you just forward it to us by hitting the forward button, then we don't get any of that data, because the data that will appear to us is, oh, an email sent from X government. And so forwarding that as an attachment is a very vital tool for us in analyzing the activity. Now, probably one of the most valuable tools I think that we've put out in the last year and a half of our young existence is the Election Day Situational Awareness Room. This is a digital platform which we open on every general election day, as well as primaries and runoffs that are happening statewide. Now, when I say statewide, I don't mean just statewide elections, but we will also do local elections if they are running in jurisdictions statewide. And so this is something where you can come in. There'll be people from other states if they have an election that day, or an election day at the general, it'll be folks from every state. Election officials, IT folks, DHS, FBI, the National Guard, and ourselves communicating with you, and you communicating with us about the threats that we're seeing or you're seeing on Election Day. It's a great tool. We had folks share information about misleading text messages that we were able to identify was actually a configuration issue by one of the campaigns that was sending out activity. There was a lot of great information that we can use to either spin up or spin down. So if multiple people are seeing something, we can say, okay, there's something happening here, and address it. Or if somebody shares something and we're able to determine that it was actually a false positive or not true activity, we can make sure that folks are aware. Let's say there's something in the news that says, oh, something bad's happening. We can use this room as a place as election officials and cybersecurity experts to work with each other to address that, so you can use the correct information to put out on Election Day about what's happening in the world. Now, another great tool is our Cybersecurity Advisory, which we release monthly. Patching is one of the most important things that you can do as an election or IT official, because most cyber actors are looking for the low-hanging fruit. And so we strongly recommend that folks take a look at this summary, because it summarizes all of the critical patches from the last month. What we're trying to do here is help you understand what a patch management program might look like. We send individually on the day that a patch comes out to the IT folks within an organization. But for you as an election official, this is a great summary to understand how many vulnerabilities are there coming out in a particular month. What do those vulnerabilities look like, and why should I be worrying about them? And so if you don't have a patch management program, you can take a product like this, go talk to your IT official and say, hey, here's the things I saw that came out in the last month. How do we address these in our various systems so that we're ensuring that we're secure from this particular vulnerability, that I know our system runs that particular software. It's a great tool to address that conversation. And if you are curious why patching is so important, you can look no further than the Equifax breach, where that was a case where there was a high critical vulnerability that was released earlier in the month prior, where the Equifax team was unable to patch every single system with that particular patch and to secure that vulnerability. And it was that vulnerability that was used for the Equifax data breach. And so we strongly recommend it's so important to be looking at patching as something that you want to consider.
Perfect. And one of those other awareness type of materials that we put out, this is actually from the EI-ISAC, but I think it's really important for election officials to know that it's out there, and it's something that we do by default set you up to receive, is our monthly newsletter. So this is something that is non-technical in nature and aimed at the end user to start building up good cybersecurity practices. So the idea here is that we're focusing on something that affects you in your everyday life. So for example, around November, we often release a monthly newsletter that has something to do with staying secure while online shopping. So that's, as everybody's gearing up for the holiday season, we're getting people thinking about secure practices while online shopping. The idea is to create these good practices so that they will then filter up into the workplace, rather than constantly hounding people, you know, make sure you're changing your passwords or make sure you're keeping an eye out for X or Y. If you make it important to a person on an individual level, it tends to create those habits more quickly. So the cool thing about this, though, is that you can actually take it and rebrand it. We release it in a Word document. So you can pull off the EI-ISAC logo, you can pull off from the desk of Thomas F. Duffy, and you can put in your own logo or name or information on there yourself and start up a cybersecurity awareness program in your own organization. So it might look pretty cool to the bosses, or it might also just save yourself some trouble. So if you do have those users that tend to not be thinking about cybersecurity and tend to do things that are less than cyber secure, it's a great way to make those types of things important to them on a personal level. And then Ben did mention that we have a number of best practices related items that were actually created by our security best practices team on the CIS side of the house. So Judd mentioned that we live under the CIS umbrella. So we worked very closely with the CIS team, DHS, election officials, to create a few best practices guides for you. So initially, one of the first things we did after being approved as the EI-ISAC, or right around that time that the EI-ISAC was approved, was created the Handbook for Election Infrastructure Security. So this actually breaks down election systems into their key components and analyzes the risks associated with each one. Of course, it's not good enough just to analyze the risks and talk about the vulnerabilities that are out there and things like that, but it also gives a set of 88 best practices for election infrastructure security. And I know you're all thinking 88 best practices and technical controls, no problem. Just kidding, that's a lot. So there are prioritized action items that you can take, and we did also create a checklist that acts as a companion for it, where it provides links to some different tools that are out there that go hand in hand with those best practices. And there is also an online assessment tool. It's called the Elections Infrastructure Assessment Tool, the EIAT, because we love ourselves a good acronym. That's available on our website for free as well, so you can analyze or basically assess your organization versus the best practices in the handbook. More recently, this April, we released a procurement guide. You know, especially with the HAVA funding and the focus on elections lately, there have been a ton of vendors that have come out of the woodworks, and it can be very difficult to navigate those waters when you're trying to procure elections technology. So we decided to create a procurement guide to help you navigate that, make sure you're getting a trustworthy vendor and a good vendor for what the precise thing is that you're looking to procure. That's also very important. So sometimes there are great vendors who are just getting into new waters that they're not entirely confident in. So it's more of a high-level overview. It's less technical than the original handbook, but it gives you some great guidance on what questions you should be including in a request for procurement or request for information. But not only does it give you the some guidance as to what to actually put in that RFP, but it also gives examples of good and bad answers to those questions that it says to include. So it really helps you navigate not only how to put together the original request, but also once you get the responses back, kind of sifting out the different vendors. And there is an online tool available for that as well. It's basically you can pick from the drop downs the type of technology you're trying to procure, and it will narrow down all of the different questions based on that.
And of course, I think everyone always wants to know what's next. And so we're going to continue to build out what it is that we've been putting together. We're looking at some additional vulnerability identification activities. We're working with some of the vendors to see if we can identify systems that are showing up on online. We're looking at some more educational products like a blog and video series, building on what Kateri started with the I Joined the EI-ISAC, Now What, talking about some of our tools, our services, as well as some cybersecurity issues, as well as some situation room enhancements. The situation room is a great tool. It's been very valuable. But we know there's some things based on last year and some of the tests we've done in the past that we can use to improve it, user access, to improve the chat functionality. And so we're looking at those as a whole and working with DHS to see if that's something we can improve. And then lastly, through our best practices team, we're looking at soon deploying some best practices for non-voting election technology as sort of a companion to the voluntary voting system guidelines, focused on the systems that are not addressed by the VVSG, as well as some supply chain guidance. And most important is what you can do on election day. It's always important to know that we are always here, that you can call us. If something's happening, we want to provide you folks a checklist that they can use. So if something does happen on election day, they know, okay, I contact the ISAC or DHS. I have my IT guy. I have my press person. I check the situation room and I share that information if I'm willing to share that information in the situation room so that other folks can be aware. It's going to be a great tool, very similar if folks are familiar with the bomb threat checklist. If you receive a bomb threat that folks keep next to their phone that the FBI created, it'll be something like that you can use as a checklist if something happens on election day. So with that, here's our contact information. As always, it's best to call that 24/7 number or email. But Kateri and myself's information is here as well. And I'll turn it over to Judd for any additional questions or to tell you more about some other great things that are going on.
Sure. Thanks a lot, and great presentation. We really appreciate it. So we did have some other questions, a couple of which I've kind of answered in chat form, so you can see the answered questions. But Jane Reeves does ask this one sort of basic question, which we sort of passed over very early in the presentation, and that is, how do you get this information? So how do you sign up for EI-ISAC? How do you make the decision about what kind of information you get? Just remind us about that.
Absolutely. So the first step is by joining the EI-ISAC, and then I don't know if you can put it out in the chat to everyone or if it's just the panelists, but the URL to register for EI-ISAC membership is https://learn.ci-security.org/EI-ISAC-registration. So if you got that all, I'm hoping, yep, he's putting it out in the chat. So you should have that link right in front of you. So step one is signing up. If you need anything in terms of adding additional contacts, once your organization is already a member, or changing what exactly you're receiving, you can always reach out to us at that elections@ci-security.org email address, and our accounts team will make any updates that they need.
And another topic that came up was Dan Brummer had a question earlier. How do you recommend pressuring your IT department who's turned down options like the Albert in the past because they believe that they've done something better? I'll throw in my 2 cents on this and then I'll hand it off to you. One thing to remember in these conversations with your IT folks is that one aspect of the EI-ISAC, one aspect of the entire critical infrastructure of elections is that we are creating an ecosystem of information. And so if you are constantly feeding information to the EI-ISAC and the EI-ISAC is feeding information back to you, that's an exchange of information that's not just supporting you, it's supporting the entire elections community. So when you have an IT staff or an IT department in your county or state that's saying, look, we want to have our own little closed ecosystem and not share information, that's not helping the rest of the elections community. And so that would be an argument that I would go to your IT staff about, that this isn't just about us, it's about elections in general and what we can do to help secure American elections. Did you guys have any more thoughts on that?
A couple more thoughts. That's definitely an opinion I share. Me as Kateri, not us as the EI-ISAC, but we definitely always encourage people to take advantage of these services, even if they have something else, because of creating that situational awareness. And for us, the more organizations that are sharing information with us, the better understanding of the threat landscape we have, and therefore we can share it with all of our members so we can really prioritize our actions, because you're never going to be able to protect against every single threat that's out there. We need to know what threats are affecting us the most so that we can basically get the most return based on the risks that are out there. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll add that one of the biggest things for us is that we're the only security organization really in the world where our only customer is the state and local governments, and we have all 50 states with a sensor. We have a range of critical infrastructure and localities with the sensor as well, and that feeds in to the information that we then tune Albert to focus on the threats that we know are affecting state and local governments specifically. And we're also receiving information from our federal partners, declassified information, other information that can populate the sensors as well to protect your systems in the immediate term. It sometimes might take a little bit longer to parse through.
Absolutely. And also from the other side of things, you know, a lot of organizations are like, oh, well, we get information from this entity, or have different sources or services that they use. My thing is defense in depth. You know, we have to have these layers of security. There's no one silver bullet when it comes to cybersecurity. So it's really important, especially if resources are at no cost, it's important to take advantage of everything that you can. Obviously, from, you know, an information standpoint, you have to be able to ingest the information, but why not enroll in IP and domain monitoring, for example, and have a second set of eyes out there looking for you? You know, if you are going through an incident, if you have an organization on retainer that you use for incident response and you pay money for that, that's totally fine. You can use us as a second set of eyes as well. My thing is, it never hurts to spend $0 to get a second set of eyes and make sure you're really locked down. So that's the other kind of vantage point that I go at it from.
All right. Well, hey, thanks again. Fantastic presentation. I learned a lot, and I hope that those that were on the webinar also learned quite a bit. Let me tell you a little bit about our larger program. So, and it used to work, but there it goes. At the Humphrey School, we have a certificate in election administration, and it does provide professional training and broadened understanding of very specific kinds of things in the elections world that you may very well want to better understand. Gosh, this is really tricky. Kateri, I can see why you were having trouble. So we do have a series of courses. In fact, a couple of those courses will start up here in a couple of days after the holiday. The last one on that list, Cybersecurity and Elections, we are building out a program. You can see that starting next week, we have a survey and elections administration course taught by Amy Wilson from my team here at the Colorado Department of State. Just to plug Amy just a little bit, she was the elections director in Utah for several years before she joined us in 2009. And she's been building our training certificate program and building all of our courses for the last 10 years. And she has a master's degree in adult education. So that's going to be a fantastic course. So please sign up for that. You can see the Center for Civic Design with Dana, Whitney, and Maggie are going to have a course on election design. And then the Cybersecurity and Elections course that Doug Chapin teaches, which is a great intro course to many of these very important topics. There is time to enroll for these classes that start next week. So please do look into those if you're interested. And then we have spring enrollment for 2020. As I mentioned, we are building out an election security concentration, which will have a couple of different courses in it, that election security overview plus physical security and a cybersecurity course. I'm going to teach that cybersecurity course in the spring, so look for that coming in the future as well. I think for those of you that really want to get interested sort of deep into those kinds of questions, that concentration might really be for you. We also have a couple of upcoming webinars. I mentioned the Department of Homeland Security offerings webinar, which we hope to do in late September. That's going to be a lot like what you just heard today, It's going to tell you about those kinds of things that you can go and get right now to help you with your election security. And then also Tammy Patrick is working on something about the Universal Postal Union. You may have heard that the U.S. has announced its intent to withdraw from the Universal Postal Union. And for every one of you that's on this call or on this webinar that has UOCAVA voters, that very well might affect your voters' ability to get those ballots back to you. So when that webinar is posted and you get a chance to learn more about the UPU, I would really recommend that you tune into that. So those are coming up. We don't have dates on either one, but they will be here shortly. There's some information about our program. You can contact Lee with any questions, and there's my, Ben, and Kateri's email addresses. Feel free to call or contact us anytime if you have any questions, or if you just want to talk about elections. That's what I do in my spare time, and my family is sick and tired of it. So that's what we have for today. I really do appreciate you joining. Take care, and we'll see you soon.